In this week's AMT Insight, I'm going to talk about the extreme global weather conditions that we've observed over the last month or so, how that's impacted metal markets, and what that might imply about the longer term risks from climate change to the metal industry. If you're enjoying these regular insights that we're putting out, I'd really encourage you to subscribe to the AMT's LinkedIn page, and that's to ensure you don't miss the future content that we'll be putting out. So if we start by looking at the severe flooding we've seen in many cities across Europe over the last couple of weeks from heavy rain that's been experienced, we can see that's ravaged a lot of towns in Germany and Belgium. You've seen Arubis calling force majeure at their 60,000 tonne per year copper product plant in Stolberg. And also in Stolberg, Berzelius's 150,000 tonne lead recycling plant has also been forced to halt, likely for at least a number of weeks because of the impacts of that flooding. Elsewhere, if we look at China, they've seen a year's worth of flooding in 3 days in Zhengzhou, which is the capital of Hunan province, and that's really where the focus of the flooding has been. You've seen that smelters have for now had to cut over 400,000 tonnes of aluminium smelting capacity, that's according to CRU, and the downstream operating rates of industrial consumers of aluminium have also been forced to close. Likely also, it's a big industrial hub with other metals and trading in other metals and scrap collection and things like that, so there's been probably a broader impact, but aluminium has really been in the focus in terms of the Hunan impact really. Moving to the other side of the coin really to look at the lack of rain, we can see that drought has really impacted production in Yunnan province in China for a number of months now. There's been power rationing of industrial consumers of electricity, so that's smelters like particularly aluminium, but also zinc and tin have been impacted, and it seems to be an ongoing issue over the summer months because of lack of rainfall. So overall, what's really the market impact? Well, the drought's clearly bullish as producers have been forced to curb output in China because of lack of power. In terms of the flooding, it's perhaps a bit more of a balanced impact. It's hit supply, but also you've seen downstream consumers also being disrupted as well. And then there's question marks over this kind of flooding, the extent to which it will impact economic growth as well. So overall, there's some impact of demand, but I think supply's been hit a bit harder. And there's also, in terms of the longer term implications there, these towns that have been destroyed by flooding or severely impacted, or towns that are vulnerable to flooding, governments might start looking a bit more seriously in the future at investments in infrastructure, which could use more metals in terms of repairing and upgrading these cities to be more flood resilient. So that's a potential upside as well. In terms of the longer term implications of it, well, why are we really seeing this extreme weather over the last few months? Well, a lot of it can be explained really by abnormal fluctuations in the jet stream. So these are the air flows that take place around the world. And you can generally, the tendency is that you tend to get these more extreme weather conditions as these jet streams meander more often, because that keeps these weather systems stuck geographically in the same places. So you'll get warm weather like drought, or rain systems and wet weather concentrated in certain locations, and it becomes concentrated and that becomes an issue. Generally, there's this view among scientists that these jet streams will have a tendency to be slower as the climate generally warms. So as we're getting this global warming and heating of the climate in the long term, these extreme weather patterns and extreme outcomes are going to become more likely. The expectation is that for every degree of global warming, the atmosphere can hold 7% more moisture, so you're getting these more extremes in terms of drought as well. There's also this shift in the jet stream because of global warming towards the poles, and that's creating these partially being said as responsible for these multi-year droughts that have been experienced in countries like Chile, which obviously has implications for metals as well. So in terms of those long-term implications, Antofagasta, for example, has said that if this drought continues, it is likely to impact their production because they're using a lot of water in the production process in terms of mining and processing. Now they're looking at desalination plants as a potential solution to this, but in a world at the moment where mining companies are coming under a lot of pressure to cut their electricity use, desalination is a very energy-intensive solution to this issue. So you wonder whether maybe if it becomes more widely adopted, this might be something that comes under a bit of pressure as well. Generally as well, as the climate warms, you're going to see a tendency towards hotter summers and colder winters. So some of these seasonal trends we see in metal markets, example things like the impact of monsoon season on mining in Southeast Asia, for example, or the impacts of colder winters on lead demand, So the colder the winter is, the more replacement batteries that people are going to need. Batteries are more likely to die in their cars, and that's going to generate more lead use, for example. So there's longer term implications to some of these changing seasonal patterns as well. On the whole, I've seen fairly bullish. So overall, what's the impact? Well, it's likely that we're going to continue to see a warming climate. I think the decarbonisation story, independently of that, is obviously very strong story for copper demand. Has been said multiple times throughout this year, and investors have really jumped on that particular story. But this underlying climate impact is likely to have quite a severe impact as well. Okay, there's going to be probably a negative impact on economic growth if we don't get this climate situation under control and global warming under control. But on the whole, I'd say metals are likely to be far more insulated from these impacts than equity markets, for example, because you're also going to see that corresponding implications and disruptions on the supply side as well, as we have seen can be the case over the last few weeks. So that's the end of this insight piece. Again, I'd strongly encourage you, if you've enjoyed these kind of insights, to join and subscribe to the AMT LinkedIn page, and that will ensure that you're getting the future insights that we're going to be sharing through LinkedIn and on our website.